You're tuned in to The Andrew Lawton Show.
You may remember on last week's show, I talked about the travel ban. And the point that I raised, which was received better than I thought it was, quite frankly, was that by the time the government talks about wanting to ban flights from India or Pakistan, as it did like an hour after my show came out, it's already too late because weeks earlier, the so-called variants had been detected in the dozens in multiple provinces. So there's no real point in saying that the double Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle virus was something that was going to come on a plane, and that was the only way we could get rid of it, by banning those flights. Which, by the way, did not stop people to come from India and Pakistan. Someone in India just has to lay over in England or lay over in Frankfurt, and all of a sudden there's no issues. So the idea that these things are being passed off as good policy is proof that the government is continuing more than a year into this to just make things up as they go. Without any indication of what the criteria for reopening will be. And that's so important because a lot of these emergency orders and the border shutdown between Canada and the US are implemented in 4-week increments and 30-day increments, and they're just extended every 30 days. And the whole point of emergency legislation is that you have to put a sunset clause into it, the rationale being that you don't want these things to require governments to actively strip these powers from themselves. But it's now become so rote to continue to renew this that it is as though these things are permanent fixtures in legislation anyway. Right now, the fact that the border is shut down between Canada and the US, despite the exemptions for cross-border trade, is such a norm that it will just become very easy to unquestioningly extend that every single time it comes up. It was just extended most recently a couple of days ago. I have no doubt that in May it will be renewed again and again and again. And it wouldn't surprise me if the Canada-US border is shut down for at least 2 years before it is reopened. And I'm a believer in the fact that no country has a legal obligation to admit others to it. So I'm of the mindset that if the US wanted to shut its borders to Canadians, I would oppose it, but it would have the legal right to do it. So this is not about forcing countries to surrender their sovereignty. It's about understanding the long-standing tradition that Canada and the US have a border that is there for security, yes, that is there for control of goods, yes, but that basically fosters a spirit of travel cooperation between these two countries. Cross-border integration between Canada and the US is a way of life, especially if you are like the 90% of Canadians who live within, I think it's 100 miles of the US border. There's a library in, I forget the Canadian city, but in the American city is North Troy, Vermont. It's a library and an opera house that actually sits on the border. So you can go in one door and enter from Canada, and you can go out the other door and exit into the United States and vice versa. And I've always thought that the US should just do like a vaccine clinic on its side of the Opera House in, I think it's North Troy, Vermont. It might be Derby, Vermont or something like that. And all the Canadians who want to get vaccinated and can't because of Trudeau's plan can get American vaccines in the rural New England and then head on home back through the way they came in. But the whole point of this is that the government has not provided any reopening plan. You've got people like Doug Ford in Ontario who are calling on the government to do more to secure the border, as though the border is not already closed. And let me tell you something. I get people emailing all the time saying, well, what about the international flights coming in, this flight, that flight? And they're pointing to all these flights that are coming in from China, from elsewhere in the world. Let me say something, because I was at Pearson Airport a couple of weeks ago, and I wish I got a picture of it, but I looked up at, there's like a 4-panel arrivals or departures board that is in this one part of the terminal. It's huge. And actually, it might be 8 panels, because each vertical dimension has 2 levels on it. And all of the flights for the entire day were on one of these 8 panels. So the idea that you can point to flight manifests and say, well, these international flights are coming in, is not really evidence of anything. Flights are virtually non-existent, and the people that are on those flights are people who have a legal right to enter Canada. And yeah, there are exemptions to the travel ban for people that have extended family here, people that have essential work to do here, but most of the people on these flights are Canadian citizens coming home. And I refuse to go along with any plan that bars citizens of this country from re-entering the country. We have a 2-week quarantine, which is meant to basically let people exhaust the virus from their system if they have contracted it while they've been abroad. But the reality is that Canada is right now more dangerous than a lot of the places from which people are coming. Because elsewhere in the world, people have eased restrictions, they've opened up because they have more of their population vaccinated. The threat to Canada is not by and large coming from travel. And when you do have situations like the double teenage mutant virus that have come in from India, these are relatively isolated, and they don't take away from the fact that travel-related cases are about 2% of the overall caseload in Canada. And sacrificing the rights of Canadians, which is what people calling for more restrictive border measures are doing, because at a certain point, that's all that's left. To go after Canadian citizens and their right to return home, which Australia did, and by the way, stranded thousands of Australian citizens abroad because they couldn't enter their own country. I won't do that, certainly not for 2% of the caseload, when 98% is coming from people doing things in the country. Community spread, workplace, etc. And the whole point of this is that I've been calling since the very beginning for an approach to the pandemic that puts science first and doesn't take these universal restrictions that are going after everyone when we can isolate where transmission is taking place. And Patty Hajdu, Politburo Patty, the health minister, had said this the other day. In fact, just hours before the government banned flights from India and Pakistan, health officials were saying that, targeted travel bans don't work. Now, in this case, I agree with them, even if they are contradicting themselves. But what was interesting is that Patty Hajdu said, well, you know what, we've got universal measures because we can't target these things. And these are my words, not hers. But she was basically saying that we can't play whack-a-mole with all of these international areas. And I'm inclined to agree, unless you are prepared to say that Canadian citizens do not have the right to return to their country. But more importantly, the Canada-US border is where you have people that are exempt from quarantine, exempt from testing, because they work in cross-border trade, they are truckers, they are doing important things that, again, have always had them going back and forth. And I would again say, do you want to sacrifice the Canadian supply chains, the food you have on your grocery store shelves, by tightening what is already a restricted border even more? It's easy to step up and say, oh, but flights are coming in, but people are still coming across the border. Yeah, it's easy to say that. But the exemptions that are there are very minimal. And I don't think the people calling for more border restrictions and more travel restrictions have thought through what the implications of those measures will be. If you liked watching this clip of The Andrew Lawton Show, True North has lots more for you all over at www.tnc.news.